Moving on to our next session for the day, which in a sense also talks about believing in who you really are and recognizing the fact that there are many ways to live. It will also highlight the very important and pertinent issue of diversity at the workplace. Please welcome Sharif Rangnekar, author of the book Queer Sapien and also a workplace inclusion consultant. Sharif actually needs no introduction, especially in a room full of communication professionals, because he has been in this profession for over 20 years now. A TEDx speaker, Sharif has addressed numerous global and local forums on communications, inclusion, and multiculturalism. He is also the director of the award-winning Rainbow Lit Fest, Queer and Inclusive. Today, as he joins us on stage, he will speak about diversity at the workplace. And joining him after his address will be Arpana Ahuja, Head of Communications at Shell India. Sharif, may we have you on stage, please?
Can I could have kept the first one? So you all can hear me, it seems, yeah? We're living in a time that you privilege the moment that you can speak and can be heard. I put this presentation together on Sunday because Amita, who's with Promise Foundation, she's just so cute and pleaded, and she says, Sharif, we do need slides. It gives a sense of order, etc., etc. So, yeah. You just heard about the squiggles and the boxes. I came at the end, but what I really liked was one sentence. Actually two. Sorry, I came really at the end. So one was out of the box, she had said, right? And the other one was about marriage and it's a cosmic joke. It seems to be. Just look at the opposition to us. We are living in a very peculiar sort of world and time. And honestly, you talked about triggering. It's going to be very difficult for me to stick to a script today. The last few months, as we sort of seek same-sex marriage or marriage equality rights, and marriage equality is actually a better term, the amount of opposition from parents, from doctors, from political parties, yeah, you may say it's expected. But isn't it interesting that the Congress has opposed in Rajasthan, but in the manifesto for the elections in Karnataka, they include us. Now you can't say that the left hand is not knowing what the right hand is doing. Oh well, God knows what they're doing with their hands. So we have that, but I'm part of several queer groups on WhatsApp. And there are issues that keep coming up about the workplace for sure, but it's so disturbing, the amount of disregard for dignity from people who are supposed to love and care for you, starting with families. It's the disregard in the press too. You may think that there is a lot of reportage, but that's relative to having almost none. And that's relative to caricaturization of a large community of people. I've been on TV quite often in the last couple of months, not out of choice, but just to defend basic rights to be. I've been speaking to a variety of journalists, and believe me, it's usually women who are much nicer and kinder, not the men. The male lens sucks. It's disgusting. The male lens will constantly tell you about equality because then you have to be equal to them. That's why when you talk of women's rights also, you will take an Indra Nui with no disrespect to the hard work she's put in. but you will take Indra Nui as an example of perseverance and hard work, but not the woman who will walk 10 miles to pick up water, go back home to some hut somewhere in this country, look after the children, rear them, bring them up, pack food for the husband who might be tilling the land, and go and help him too. That was not going to come up into a discussion of equality for the simple reason there is an expectation that that's her role and that's her job. So there are many things when we talk about workplace and when we talk about workplace inclusion. So we're really talking about culture. And every day, I don't know where to start. Section 377, how many of you all know what happened when the Supreme Court order came and they read down 377? How many of you all know what that order was about? Can anyone put up their hands? It's okay, I didn't really actually expect an answer. It was just a pause. We were only legalized to the extent of having the sexual act. That is all. That is all. So essentially, that act by the Supreme Court limited us back just to the bedroom. Assuming we have sex only in the bedroom, it could be in the kitchen, it could be in the living room, it could be other places, there could be farmhouses and bushes, all kinds of ways, but it was limited to the sexual act. There was no other right given to us, even though we were supposed to be equal citizens. No one questions. None of you all, I think, would have thought, because I would assume most of you all are heterosexual, that even the Constitution doesn't have a sexuality. But when you have male dominance over everything, and that becomes part of the culture, you assume that that's the normal. So when you're including people from the community into the workplace, you're including a lot of lives with different stories. You're including a lot of hardships. You're including, and you should, their mental health problems, their sense of fear, the sense of inequality. You're including all of that, and you have to be prepared to do that if you really mean it. It took me till the age of 50 to come to a point to feel I'm legit and I'm valid. 50. Most of my life is gone. When my book, Straight to Normal, My Life as a Gay Man, came out, that was January 2019, and I just started writing it after 377 was read down. The thing that hurt me the most at that point, and I went into depression, a serious depression, after the book was out. And usually people would have thought you got rave reviews and you're going to so many literature festivals, you're going here and there and talking that, oh wow, life's fabulous. Our notions of success, unfortunately, are quite strange and peculiar because we don't talk about happiness. And self-actualization, we don't talk about those things. We're so commercialized in our minds. So I really had down because I'd written something at the end of that book, which was that I'd spent 50 years just trying to be myself, that the few opportunities of love, the few people that you could meet who were from your community, you couldn't really invest in that love, make better choices because there were very few who were out. And that I'm partnerless. That I don't have anything that my brothers had. Everywhere I looked around, every peer of mine who was straight or so-called settle down. And I'm not saying that you have to settle down or that you have to live in a certain way. But this is the whole sense that you couldn't have a lover. And for the longest time, I used to keep holding myself responsible that I failed. I didn't once think that the whole system had failed around us. It took a long time to understand from the younger generation that when we talk about suicide, even the press makes this mistake every now and then, that you use the word commit and you put the whole responsibility of the act on the person who ended their life and you don't say died by suicide. We have incredible cricketers like Kapil Dev making mockery of mental health. Honestly, if I had an unmanicured middle finger, I would have shown it to him. We have issues of religion that influence, obviously, culture. We have caste. It took me a long time to understand that I'm a Gaur Saraswat Brahmin. I had no clue. That's the problem with caste as well and being privileged, that you just imagine that your world is the only world. It took me a long time to understand what it is to be Dalit, that within our community, we have queer Dalits. And some of you all being in PR would also know Dhruvu Jyoti, who's a senior editor at Hindustan Times, who identifies as a queer Dalit. He's more than one time a minority. He's 2 times a minority in our system. If you have to include him into your workplace, you have to think of such things. You have to also think about the fact that class and caste are intertwined in the Indian system. Because those who have privilege and who have access are usually upper caste. The system runs around that, by and large. Education. Just imagine that when I studied, and when lots of your kids still study in schools, colleges, etc., how many of them actually know about queer life? Forget that. How many of them know about women leaders that have been part of the subcontinent? Most of us begin and end with Rani Jhansi. Most of us maybe think of Sarojini Naidu. And that too, some of them may remember Sarojini Naidu because she was there as part of that film Gandhi. But you have to read more. Thankfully, there is a set of people writing about Durgavati and several other women leaders that we've had. We have these token statements by men. Behind every successful man, there is a woman, for God's sake. And many times it's the woman way ahead. We have these notions of masculinity which are just sickening. For example, the way men talk about penetration, right? Like they've invaded the world. It takes a lot of strength to receive. It takes a lot. We have all these kind of notions that create the culture that we have. When I studied in school, obviously, and in college, there was no queer reference. When we studied even mythology from the subcontinent, we weren't told about Shikhandi to the extent we should have been. We weren't told about Krishna and his many roops, Mohini. Gender fluidity, Vishnu. We weren't told to that extent about the Upanishads or the Panchatantra. I'm not talking about in left and right here, politics or this. No, I'm just talking about what was there. We weren't even told that homophobia is imported. We've been told that homosexuality is imported. Then what the hell is at the Khajuraho temples? Group sex. Women having sex with each other. What about all the Hindu gods who are basically androgynous, but we are conditioned to believe a man wears something and a woman wears something. But the gods can wear what they want, almost wear nothing. You have to go to certain temples. I remember when Devdutt Patnaik opened the Rainbow Lit Fest in 2019, which I started out with and curated, and he was showing us pictures of, individuals who were on different temples in Tamil Nadu and different other states, etc., where they looked like women, but they had mustaches. Some of them had beards. androgynous, trans depiction. But we've been conditioned and cultured to believe that no, that's not how we are. There's a dear friend of mine, some of you all would have known, he was a very well-known historian, Salim Kidwai, who passed away a couple of years ago. And it was a huge loss to historians, the whole space of history, as well as to the gay community because he was gay. He was in Canada doing his PhD. Section 377, a very nice, beautiful Victorian law. Almost every colonized nation had 377 in one form or the other. You'll be surprised to know that Islamic nations that weren't colonized didn't have issues per se until recently about homosexuality. And I'll come to that point. I'm telling you all of this for the simple reason that when you're including, you have to think about the lives and the way so many of us have had to live. You're not just bringing in people as clones. You know, that clonish system has to break, which is DNI is all about and should be. So he said one thing. He got arrested at a bar under Section 377 with a group of other people, and being a foreigner, it was even more difficult at that time. He had the opportunity to move out from there and got some of the best universities in the US. He had opportunities there, but he decided to come back to India. And his only reason was because of the subcontinent's history, including what Alka Pandey, who's again another very well-known individual. She runs the cultural programming at the Habitat Center. She's one of the few museum curators in this country. That the Islamic period also in the subcontinent was full of hedonistic sort of people. I mean, pleasure, wine, cheese, and I don't know whether they had cheese, but they had wine for sure, and they had all this other kind of alcohol. They had a lot of fun, they had a lot of poetry, a lot of art. And in all of that space, there was a lot of fluidity of sex and sexuality. Gender wasn't the way it is interpreted today. Most people think, just as we keep hearing in the court, that gender is between the legs. No, darling. Gender may be between the legs, but sexuality is here and here. They knew it. So now we have to try and figure out who was progressive and who isn't when we keep saying, oh, it's 2023 and we're still discussing this. It's like what the filmmaker O'Neill said, that he doesn't imagine that My Brother Nikhil, which he made some almost 20 years ago, would go through the census today. Nandita Das, while speaking at the Rainbow Lit Fest, she says, I'll be surprised if Fire would go through the censor boards today, but it did go through earlier with no cuts. So we really have to ask ourselves what kind of culture are we really creating and what culture we want to create, really, as people. Media. I keep hearing from so many people, oh, the media is doing a great job. For God's sake, they only speak to one section of queer people who speak English, who have safe homes, who are secure in a job, who've got inheritance, who has social capital so they don't have to worry about a hospital, right? I tell my family, what am I going to do when my mom's gone? And anyway, at the age of 82, should she really be going to the hospital with me to look after me? God forbid I have to need care. Do you know that I need to have a blood relative who can look after me and can take decisions for me in the courts, in a hospital? Even my death certificate can be contested as to who picks it up, unless it's a blood relative. I might be able to will it, but it still can be contentious. So my partner will not be recognized as a partner to look after me when I fall sick. Think of that trauma for a moment. Think of those problems for a moment, and then let's discuss what is equal and what is meritocracy and what is merit and what is inclusion. Think of another thing. Homosexuals and transgender folks cannot donate blood. Imagine my mom, if she needs blood, or anyone else, I can't give it to her. And then the same country talks about blood being thicker than water. Think of all of these factors when you're talking about including people. Think of what you all call baggage. But the baggage is actually of the system. Advertising. I feel guilty that when I was on Integral running and working for a large multinational company as our client, that I actually conceptualized this most sickening ad when I think of it as an idea, that I showed family and healthcare and care limited to the mother and 2 children. I think some photos had 1. Maybe you thought of family planning or something, I don't know. But I didn't think of the man taking any such responsibility. Because I was so conditioned by the marketplace. I was so conditioned by the idea of what sells. So advertising excludes so often, so does PR. Media, cinema. Just think in the media, what is the representation of the queer folks? Think of the media as to how many women are there unless they look like air hostesses on TV. Think of how air hostesses are hired anyway, and how women are commoditized to be this fancy, beautiful thing walking around, right? That's the kind of language used often. I don't know how many of you all do read data on media, for example. Amongst 121 of key roles and jobs in the press, 116 are upper caste. What do they understand of the marginalized? I was at a conference of the Canadian High Commission, I think it was 2017 or 18, December. And I met a very old dear friend of mine who was a senior journalist, and he's extremely senior journalist today in a very, very fabulous position to be in. And he said that, Sharif, we're very inclusive. And we let all, the gay people and all write their articles. और हमें तो कुछ समझ ही नहीं आता है, हम नहीं लिखते यार, उसमें तो problem आ जाएगा. I mean, that's the state of journalism. So if honestly speaking, if the media were to take that as a maxim or as the benchmark of how to report, then criminals should report on crime, businesses report on business, right? Farmers report on farming, politicians write about politics, government writes about politics. Then we don't need the media, we just need a facilitator at best. So Google is good enough, to do that. I mean, that's the height of disengagement, but it's also the height of honesty, So that's how you get excluded with people like that in the system out there. Cinema and the same press, 2020. I don't know how many of you all tried to suffer watching Lakshmi Bomb with Akshay Khanna. Kumar, sorry. Yeah, Akshay Khanna is better looking visitor. Yeah, definitely. Although I have to tell you, at one time Akshay Kumar was a gay icon. He was this, appearing to be someone a little bit more from the hinterland and macho sort of guy, and there were a lot of gay men who loved him. And but in that movie was a horrible representation of the trans community. And obviously the press kept writing about how brave he was. Has anyone spent time with a trans person to ask them how brave they are? He was just acting in a horrible script, in a horrible film. Presses also can be as bad as this. That when, that same year during COVID, Milind Soman acted in another film, I can't remember, or some serial, Pati Patni or something, and Panga, or some sort of thing, and I remember vaguely. A lot of the mainstream press put out a photograph and said, Miland looks like a trans person, like a hijra. There is one look according to the press. This is how you get conditioned, right? About evil people. So you decide, like the American press decides, everyone with a beard is a terrorist. Yeah. So there is another issue. So I'm going to rush a few things down. I'm just trying to figure out what happened? What did I do? So this is another thing which I have talked about, what it is to be a man, what it is to be a woman, what are the roles that are expected of us. We don't fit into any of these binaries and of ideas of what it is to be a woman, what it is to be a female, what it is to sort of be, how to walk, how to talk, clothing, masculinity. This is another thing that impacts us and impacts the way you all would automatically think, because you're expected to fit in to all of those sort of roles. You would know, so many women out here that would know the challenges that some of your own would have faced even to just get education. We still live in a country where there are times that girls are not given milk, but the boy is given milk in some of the states up in the north also. So you have all these kind of discriminatory issues that the queer community faces, because we are not we don't prescribe or subscribe to any of this really. Unless we are trans and we become a trans man or we become a trans woman, then we go in and transit genders. But that's not across the spectrum of LGBTQIA+. So a lot of people don't understand that. Oh. So basically, this is what one feels quite often. Alienated in this sort of a system. When I was running Integral, there was a campaign run by one of the employees. And he was anyway apparently a problematic employee. His boss wanted him out of the company. But I wasn't privy to the campaign that had been run, which had nothing to do with why he was to be dismissed. But he sent a message out to people at the reception, at the gate, at the door, the support staff in Hindi and in English, saying you're working for half a man and you shouldn't be. I have had depression, as I talked about, more than once. When I was in class 8 in Calcutta, I came home from school one day, opened my desk and wrote on it, "Nobody loves me, I don't want to live." I almost took mercury chrome and almost drank it, but I didn't have the courage, and I'm not sure whether I had hope, but I definitely didn't have the courage to end my life at that moment. But I've been through these moments even last year. And when you keep reading what comes out in the press even today on the same-sex marriage petitions, and when you hear the councillors from the opposition towards our rights, it keeps triggering a lot of these issues of where have we come and where are we going, even after so many years of having so-called changed and progressed as a nation. So we have n number of problems that when you're including, you have to think of these things. And I will just explain. More than half of the gay community have considered ending their life. Think of that kind of person who comes and seeks a job. What would trigger him? What would he feel like in an organization? That's where 75%, this is India, 75%, this is 1.5 years ago. Yes, we existed this report. 75% fear physical and verbal abuse. The reason today, and Amit was sending me a message, Sharif, where are you? In the last 2 weeks, I have engaged with 2 cases of conversion therapy. It's banned, by the way. It's been banned only very recently. But do you think parents care about their children, or do they care about society or their biases? A girl in South Delhi went through conversion therapy, and she must understand what that is. And that happens to, I know people. She is working with one of the big 4 firms. Imagine what trauma she'll be bringing to the workplace Do you think of equality at that moment or equity? She's been raped on the instructions of parents with the hope and the belief that they can be converted to heterosexuality. And this is the second such case that in recent days that I've come across. How helpless would a person be? I had been sexually assaulted in 2003 after a report I'd done by a large corporation. But I couldn't talk about it till 2019. And yet you will have people wondering why women didn't speak about Me Too earlier. The amount of trauma that you carry, you put a lid on some of these issues for the longest time, believing life will get better and let me take it out. But it does get triggered at some point, and you do sometimes feel that you're in that moment and that place that you can talk about it, because it doesn't necessarily help you because that's already happened, but it might help others. This is an international report. 57% believe that if they come out, it slows their progress. And when I interact with a lot of corporations, they say, oh, we've got ARG, we've got this, we've got that, we've got policies and all that stuff, but they don't deal with the ecosystem. They don't deal with sexism at the workplace. They don't deal with the idea that you need a toilet for trans folks. They don't believe in all of those things. To create an environment, you create an environment, an ecosystem. We should know by now that laws don't change everything overnight. Otherwise, we wouldn't drive the way we drive. We wouldn't treat women the way we treat women. Or caste issues, right? Even though our constitution was written by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, ask the great Bollywood as to how many films have they really made on Ambedkar. Like that. There are many other things. Obviously, businesses often look for a business case. But this is a World Bank report 2014, at the time when India was talking about change and Vikas and Achedhan. But it didn't make it to the front page. Why? It should have been. So really, at the end of the day, when you're talking about culture, it is empathy. It is your ability to listen, to engage, and not be like that journalist said, "Mujhe nahi kuch karna hai, ya main unko jagah de dunga." You know? You have to listen. You have to start handing the mic over. Let them talk. And don't treat them. When I'm using the word them, I'm talking about our queer community. Don't treat them as something else. That is not their only identity. You know, we don't reduce heterosexuals just to the act of sex, for God's sake. We're a little more respectful. We do know our parents were heterosexual also. You have to understand that there are lived experiences. When I was telling you about all these traumas, etc., I'll just give you a simple, quick example that if a woman has been sexually assaulted, is she going to respond in the same way to touch in the workplace after that? A handshake or a hug, which you might think is innocent act. I know enough people who come and meet me and they say, oh, Sharif, even I know another gay person. Like we're aliens or something, we just come and discuss something else with me. Now we can talk about music, we can talk about Akshay Kumar and Khanna. And we can talk about, Narendra Modi and the 56-inch chest. We can talk about Rahul Gandhi and Pappu can dance Sala. And we can talk about so many things. We are multidimensional people. And the moment you start doing this and treating us as anyone else, the community starts opening up. They start feeling more comfortable in their skin. They start feeling safe. Try and understand very few safe spaces. Even today, so often I wonder that I don't yet have a queer culture around me with all the support that I have from my mom. And at a point in time, as far as my mom went, I started thinking that I'm going to live as long as she's there. After that, I don't really know what I'm going to do, whether I want to live anymore. And I have serious thoughts. Those who know me well and know me closely know that until I found love, which was just about 2 years ago. You have to also remember, because this is another thing that most corporations say, no, but they don't fit in. Yeah, the language and all the way they speak, etc. Hey, darling, if you want to include, they don't have the same background. meritocracy, which has been sold to us for the longest time with globalization, of conformity, of one idea of success, one idea of development, one idea of education, one idea of fashion, one idea of beauty. All of those things don't include, right? Body shaming, all of those various other things. Meritocracy works in an equal world, and come on, we should know India is far from equal. How many people have access to even water? And in the queer community, the number of trans people who are thrown out of their home, it's large numbers. But do remember this, one thing I would say, most of you all either are parents or going to be parents or intend to be parents. I'm not trying to normalize your life. Don't want to be, don't be. It's perfectly fine. But remember that when you're including and when you're dealing with that kind of culture, absorb it a lot more. Your child could be queer. And most of the change that we're seeing of D&I is because of a younger generation who's pushing back on the idea of one everything, who's talking about labels, owning them themselves and not being imposed, a label not being imposed on them. We're talking about that kind of generation. We're talking about a generation who believes Black lives matter, that all lives don't matter when it's an unequal world. That's all I would say to you because of the time. And my dear friend Arpana is going to come up. We have to share this one, is it? Okay. Oh. This is privilege when I have my own and she has her own.
Yes. Hi, everybody, and thank you for that deeply personal and passionate context setting, if we may call that. The topic is diversity at the workplace. And I think for the benefit of everybody, diversity can mean a lot, right? It's not just gender, it's inclusion, whether it's mental health, it's workplace accessibility. There's just so many dimensions to diversity, but for the benefit of this discussion today, we will be focusing on gender, on sexuality, identified sexuality, and those are the dimensions that we'll go. A lot of diversity, inclusion, those are the words, right? But D&I is more than policies, programs, or headcounts. What is the difference between diversity, inclusion, and belonging? I think you touched upon it briefly in your preface, but just something to delve deeper into.
I think diversity and inclusion don't mean anything if you don't feel you belong in any place, in a space, etc. Because diversity and inclusion should create belonging, because then you find representation, when you find people who are similar, when you find you're not being judged over everything in terms of your look, your choices, your idea of love, or how you speak, and the accent you might have, and the mother tongue influence you might have when you're speaking English. That's all of that is, I think what diversity is. I mean, in the sense is, I think when we look at it's strange that in a country like ours that we have to discuss diversity when we have over 20 plus recognized languages, when we have over 1,000 dialects, when 4 religions have taken birth in this nation, and we have sects, we have tribals, we have indigenous people, we have so many cuisines, we don't even, as even Hindus, who are the majority, don't even have one New Year, that we need to be discussing diversity. It is odd. It also shows we are quite disconnected from our own people and our own culture of at a larger sense of it. But to feel that you belong is really is about safety. It is about having, by and large, no trepidations, no sense of fear. That where you walk, where you talk, and I think as women would know that quite often their parents would have told them, to choose safety over freedom. So the fact that, if you have to perpetually be on the guard, then you don't feel you belong. Then you don't think diversity actually exists. And you don't think then inclusion is part of that ecosystem that you're in.
So Sharif, if we were to talk about equality versus equity versus inclusion. right? These are all, but they're three distinctly different aspects.
See, as I said earlier, equality is usually, if you have to understand that most laws, most systems have been written by men. And there's a male gaze. There's a male gaze on everything. There's a male gaze, if you've read the latest report on the UNICEF, for example, on the male gaze and advertising and cinema, you will read and you will know how the woman has been portrayed vis-a-vis how the woman would choose to be portrayed. So, equality invariably, on a larger sort of sense of that word, is about being equal to man. Why? That's not equity. Equity is choice. Equity is about making adjustments and having that space for everyone and recognizing that everyone has a different lived experience. It is a journey. It cannot happen overnight. Definitely not. And definitely not, it wouldn't happen overnight if most of the men are in the legislature, if most men are producing cinema, if most men head media houses, if most men own and run corporations and are scripting the education system, are deciding the laws and sitting in the judiciary. How many women are there in the judiciary? Equity is about choice. It's also widening the scope of how you live life. That there are not only 10 jobs that are available, that there is space for art, that there is space for music, there is space for independent art and independent music and folklore and all of those things. That is equity, and that's the big difference. And we typically don't talk about it too much because then the man loses his space. You will deconstruct the whole system. And if you've seen one big change, thanks to women, thank you, Arpana. We go back a really long time. But if you see on OTTs, for example, you see the woman's lens now coming in. The woman is behind the camera. And quite often there are women, including trans women, who are writing scripts. That is changing the storytelling. You don't find heroes, who can sort of get 10 bullets, 20 bullets and still get up and kill another 10, 20 people. You don't have all that sort of masculinity in that sense. You're seeing women in different roles out there. That is bringing change. You see a sort of a kind of normalization in some of the OTT series, etc., of same-sex love. And you're seeing so often something that we didn't see for the longest time, of women making love to women. So you're seeing these kind of changes because you need that lens to bring that aspect of diversity, equality, and equity, where the choices start to expand,
You just validated the case for needing diversity, right? That's
Yeah,
exactly what
absolutely,
diversity.
absolutely.
Moment you have diversity on the table, you are seeing the change that's there.
I'll just add one thing. I think, I've been a little harsh maybe when it comes to men, but men, the whole patriarchal system has forced also men to behave also in a certain way. It took us forever to see a man cry, right? And took us forever to recognize that Raymond's ad and see what was supposedly a complete man because he cared for his dog. But it took us that much time, to see that happen. And the whole corporate system and the business system has been dominated by men who've expected to be the breadwinner and the bread earner. So they are always focused on profit. They're compelled. And until you change that system, which means you have to talk about banking, insurance, investment banking, private equity, you have to think for them, you need to get them to really look at how profit is made and who's making that profit. A lot of the D&I problems that have arisen or has become a topic is also because of the wealth gap that has been created, and all of these factors that are included in that.
So I think that's really where, my next question to you is also about, therefore, policy versus culture, right? Like there are policies at the workplace, but how does that play out versus the culture of a place? Because policies are just policies at the end of the day.
See, I'll tell you, for example, Thailand, which has been one of my favorite nations, and I really love that country. It doesn't have all the laws to protect the queer community. But quite often they haven't had to think of having all of those laws because culturally, in large parts of Thailand, because it wasn't colonized as well, now it is being Americanized, so they are facing some challenges. But it was by and large very androgynous culture. lady boys all over the place, and you wouldn't know, and you don't need to know actually, but queerness is there as part of life. There's something in their culture called Maip and Rai, which it doesn't matter. But of course, laws are required because, God forbid, just like rape, violence, etc., if something is inflicted, you need to know that there's a law, there's a policy in place that you can invoke and turn to. But eventually, most of these policies are either benefits or they are deterrents, like all laws are. So you have to have them, but they become irrelevant over a period of time if you have a culture and an ecosystem that is inclusive, that does sort of create that space, that treats everyone like who they wish to be. As we use that word, the whole self and all. For most of my time I hid. I mean, when you met me, did you even know I'm gay? You didn't, yeah. See, but then you belong to a certain thinking that to her it really didn't matter. We've never had to discuss sex and sexuality. I mean, sex maybe, sexuality. We haven't.
Sex
had to,
a lot of times,
sex
but yeah.
but yeah, but we haven't discussed. I mean, we didn't have these. We didn't need to have these kind of conversations.
So I think you reference, right? Bring your whole self, not just at the workplace, but it's about bringing your whole self to every aspect of your life. And I think that's where we need a reality check. Where is the psychological safety, right? And how do we understand fear, which is so real at the workplace? Because it's not just exclusive to the workplace. When bring your whole self means bring your whole self, which is a part of your everyday living, which starts from the time you wake up in your own house.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we do use, as I said in the last slide, but I rushed through it, empathy. We need to, as people, engage with different sets of people. As a society, at a certain level, we become socially immobile. So we don't understand caste. We don't understand what it is to perhaps, hopefully, most of you all have not faced violence in your home, but you don't know what violence in the home is like. Most of you all maybe didn't face bullying in school and college and university, etc., and wouldn't know what it is. So when you grow up with a lot of these things, it's not about overstating it or whatever. As the lady earlier talked about triggering, I mean, she talked about it in a different context to a great extent, but it does trigger all kinds of fear. I, as the CEO of a company, was shit scared that if someone gets to know that I told my chairman only in 2014 that I'm gay, and he was so close to me, we were so close, he treated me more like his son rather than anything else, than like anyone else, that I carried that fear. You have to understand and engage with stories of queer folks, of people who come with different experiences. You need cinema, you need books, and I think it's fantastic that what Amit has done is not just this conversation, but making books of different kinds, of different writers, available and accessible for free to each one of you all who've come here. That's how we learn. We've lost context because we don't have enough art which tells us these stories. We don't have enough stories that tell us about androgyny within our own religions. We don't know the queerness that it has existed in Islam, for example, and we just believe that that religion is X, Y, or Z and hateful towards the community just because some set of them claim to be like that. We believe reports that have come out that some 70% of doctors say that we've got a mental disorder. Go to facts, engage with facts. You're growing up with a lot of information, yes, a lot of misinformation too, but you can do fact checks. You can get there. And once you start knowing these stories, once you start engaging with people and listening to them and treating them as normal human beings, you will be delighted. And you will be doing, as I said at the end, yourself a favor because you never know who's queer and who isn't and what your child might be like. I have just caught up with a friend 2 days ago and she says, I think my child is queer, what do I do? So I said, don't do anything. Just,
Still your child.
Still your child.
Yeah.
I mean, question, so you have to look at everyone. I just want to say one thing, is that one thing, and I'm so proud of my mom. We have a lot of fights and arguments, etc., but that's the kind of friendship we have. But my mom said that she brought up the 3 boys as a gardener. And a gardener means, nurturing.
Circle shape.
Huh. And you put, you keep you move some plants into the shade, some put them out in the sun for a while, some need more water or less water, some need neem khali, and some need something else in terms of fertilizer, etc. That you do all of that, etc., so that you can help them grow, and you facilitate their growth. So that's all I think a parent needs to do, and anyone needs to do.
Yeah.
It's space. And
So-
recognizing these needs.
So we can, of course, sit here all day and
Forever.
continue to have this very engaging conversation here about the stories, but we do have a time limit, and I think just respecting that in the interest of the next speaker.
Yeah.
Let's, Sharif is here. You can please find time, engage with him, and trust me, he has so many stories to share with all of us. Thanks, Sharif.
Thank you. Thanks, Amit. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.